All right, happy Monday, everyone. This is the last meeting in April. It has flown by. We did not hit our goal of a April release for Gateway API, but we do have at least a release candidate out, and we are making progress. So hurrah! Thank you to everyone for helping get the last bits and pieces in. Reminder, this is a Kubernetes community meeting, so if you've got a moment, if you can go ahead and add your name to the agenda as an attendee. And let me actually drop that link in for anybody who can't get to it. This agenda is meant to be an open-ended agenda, so if anyone has anything, don't hesitate to add your own items at any point. Drop something in chat, raise your hand. Whatever we want everyone to feel like they can speak and have their topics discussed. And with that, I think we do have enough time to get through everything today. So feel free to add anything to the agenda that you might want to. Um, yeah, I think that's everything. Do we see any new people? No, I think we're good. Okay, cool. So first up, the next week's meeting, just as a reminder, is at an EU-friendly time slot, which is decidedly not Australia-friendly. Sorry, Nick. But other than Nick, are there any people at this meeting slot that are unable to make the earlier time slot, or it's just uncomfortable for them? There's a chance that we may end up moving towards slightly more frequent EU-friendly meetings, which would mean slightly less meetings at this time slot. So trying to get an understanding of who else that might be painful for. So painful for Phil and probably myself. Um, yes, but much better for East Coast. Yes, I know. I've taken these meetings on the East Coast and it is painful. So definitely understand that. Okay. All right, well, good to know. Not going to make any rash decisions here, but we'll bring it up again at the next meeting at this time slot, and we'll also just compare the attendance and interest level at the EU friendly time slots. We've been getting a surprising amount of attendance, so that may have become our more widely attended meeting slot right now. As painful as it is for me because I don't like waking up at that time, but yeah. Anyways, that's it. Okay, so next up is 1.1. We really are in the final stretches. Left a few links in from last time, but cleared most of it because we know everything that's in the scope of the release. We're just into bug fix territory. RC1 went out on Wednesday of last week. Hopefully, some of you have had an opportunity to test it out, try it out. One of the big changes in there is that we bumped Go version to 122 and Kubernetes dependency version to 1.30. So that's going to be a whole bunch of fun changes to deal with. Hopefully nothing too crazy, but we really like to get some feedback on that as soon as possible. If we get a bit more feedback, I think we're good to do a second release candidate on Thursday, and then usually between RC2 and our final release, we try and avoid any changes at all other than documentation. Right now, we've penciled in Wednesday, May 8th for a final release, but if things go really smoothly, maybe we'll get it in a day early. We'll see. With that said, we're really hoping to get as much feedback as possible by Wednesday. If there's anyone on this call that is working on an implementation that has tried out RC1 or could try out RC1 this week, that would be really, really helpful. One of the best bits of signal we can get at this point is seeing something like this. So in this case, this is Istio reporting that they are conformant with 1.1. Getting some additional feedback from other implementations as well. It says, hey, the conformance test, whatever, this works for us, would be really helpful. So getting just a little bit more signal, or even better, if there's some kind of bug report or something that you catching that before release is always good. And then the last thing, Candace has been working to get everything in place for the 1.1 blog post. Candace, I'm not sure if you're on the call, but if you are, is there anything I don't see her. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, I think this one is basically good to go now. So if you want to jump in and take one last look, adding any additional feedback, that's great. But otherwise, I think we've had lots of participation, reviews, etc., and it should be good. Yeah. Okay, so the bigger topic for today, I think, is conformance, because we've had some fun PRs recently that have tested the limits of our conformance system. And first up would be Istio. And I think Istio was maybe slightly easier to handle. But basically, if I'm remembering this situation correctly, there's a test that had to be skipped. And this test is skipped because a specific feature wasn't supported, but that feature was considered core, or well, because it didn't have a supported feature, it just meant that the thing was core. And so what John has proposed in this follow-up is that we consider that feature an extended level feature. I think that is mesh consumer route. Am I understanding that correctly, John? That's the and cluster?
Yeah, I put two different ones.
Okay.
For because two tests have similar concern.
Okay. That makes sense. So cluster IP matching is the thing that Istio actually supports, and consumer, oh no, is the thing.
We have two different modes, and in each mode we fail to support one or the other.
Got it. Okay.
Sidecars.
Got it. Okay. So I think this solution is okay to me, but I think right now we're just waiting on other mesh implementations to sign off and say that this change works and is okay. And I think that's it. Anyone want to weigh in on this topic, or I'm good with this approach?
I think that in this case, making the feature extended makes sense. Yeah, I think that it's pretty fair that if we have we've only got 3 implementations at the moment. If one of them can't do something, then that makes it extended at this point for the mesh profile.
Yeah, makes sense to me. That's a good summary of where I tend to land, and I think Costin has a good question. My understanding of the other two is Kuma does support it, and I think Flynn's and Linkerd's last conformance report was 0.8, but I think I don't know. Well, I'll have to ask Flynn. Okay. Cool. I don't know, John, if you meant to add anything else.
Nope, that all sounds good to me.
Okay. Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So if we can get this in, then we'll rerun our conformance test, and I'll update my PR. So we're not. So it's the intent you don't skip tests. You just say that you don't support the feature, and then the test framework skips it for you. Is that how it works?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, then, cool.
Yep. And then there's the application gateway for containers from Azure. Really excited to get another. This is a brand new conformance report. We have not. This is the first report we've gotten from this provider before, so that's awesome. Always great to see another conformant implementation. This one is unfortunately more challenging to figure out what to do with, and maybe someone I see some folks from Microsoft on the call. Maybe some of you can chime in on the challenges you're running into.
Hey, so I'm Sneha. So I can chime in. I created this PR. So we've run the conformance tests. I mean, we do actually, like, technically for every time we do a release, we do run the conformance test to know how far on gateway APIs we are conformant with. I think we just got the time now to, do the reporting and publish these. So if you take a look at our PR, we do have, the core implementation for HTTP in there. But unfortunately, we have one of the skip tests, which is gateway class observed generation bump. And the reason why we've skipped this is mainly because of like implementation details for us as a cloud provider. So what this test does is it creates a new gateway class as a part of the test suite. And unfortunately, our implementation only allows Azure has defined a set of gateway classes, and our controller will only respond for gateway classes of that type. So, we have skipped this test out for that reason. Since it comes in the core features, unfortunately, and it's the whole core set, and it's not like an extended feature, we can't eliminate it out explicitly. Like initially, we had even the port. We support only port 80 and port 443, and we had the 8080 test as well. And Rob gave me the, like the separate feature, so we could eliminate that one out there. But unfortunately, for this particular scenario, there is no neat way of doing it, and that's why we get a partial success status on the core implementation. And I think I saw a comment on the PR saying that it would be nice, like if you're like completely successful and then you have like what is ruled out. But I mean, I wish like if there is some way in which, because like there will be some implementation details, that like cloud providers will have specific to theirs, and not, I mean, maybe like partial or some other nice way to go around this would be great. And
Yeah,
I think we
Rob,
have.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, I was just
Yeah,
gonna, doesn't GKE predefine gateway classes too?
Yeah, this is a big pain for us too. To be clear. So our workaround, the only reason that we need to watch gateway classes and react to them is this test, right? This is an annoyance, is what I would say. But I think it is probably still good for the overall UX of the API if you create a gateway class with the expectation that GK's or whoever's controller is going to handle it, and you get no feedback on that. That's not great. If I remember correctly, the observed generation bump doesn't actually require you to accept a gateway class. It just requires you to bump the observed generation, but it accepts any value. Like you could not accept the gateway class.
Okay,
It
so
just
it would be valid to set like accepted false then, as
Yeah.
in the conditions if you're targeting this controller with, okay.
Okay, so
Yeah.
still process it. Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, we just filter it out because it saves us some processing time on the controller, right?
Yeah, no,
It's
I know it's a big pain, and I'm open if others would rather not deal with this, I might be convinced, but I'm open to others. Like I know many do support this right now, so maybe if anyone else on this call has an opinion on this one, I'm certainly open.
I think it's probably relevant to talk about the reason why we have it, and that's just to make sure that in the case that we do want to check that everything when it updates the status bumps the observed generation correctly. It is particularly important that the observed generation matches in the status for conditions to make sure that that the condition isn't stale. And so for I mean, I know I know and appreciate that it sucks, and I'm sorry, but there's just we need to check that at least I mean, I think it's probably fine that what GKE is doing and what Rob proposed you do for the Azure one as well is and is important. And so like doing it by just rejecting stuff that's not the ones that you expect is fine with me. Colston asks in the chat, is there a direct benefit for users? Yes, the direct benefit is that users can know that the status in the gateway is fresh. So observed generation uses the automatically incremented metadata generation field from every object, and the contract is that when you update the status, you update the observed generation so that as a user you can compare the metadata generation in the metadata field and the observed generation and make sure that they're the same.
I mean,
yes,
I understand
Austin?
I understand our contract, but most Kubernetes resources don't have this, and it seems. I mean, are we sure that users are actually using this, or is just something we made up? And
I mean,
just for
no.
gateway,
So
other thing.
if you if you don't do this, then there's no way to know that the condition that has been set is for the current generation of the object. Like it is impossible to know if you make a change, if the change has been reflected in the object or not. Now,
Okay, but
yeah,
other
I mean,
resources in Kubernetes don't have this. I mean, service,
Well, so-
pretty much nothing else does.
yeah, so this is the only reason that they don't have this is because the condition field was V1 and it couldn't be moved to required, but it is strongly recommended. Yeah, places things that are using conditions should be using this. Now,
So, I mean, I completely agree and get the part where, having the observed generation bump so that that, your controller has processed the latest version. Like the question is like, is it mandatory for us to have this particular check on gateway classes? Like if we have these on gateway objects and route objects and have that as a part of the conformance, wouldn't that be good enough validation? Because, like broadly speaking, like in general, like, gateway class is so up on the stack that users try to minimize the number of changes they make there. And because the blast radius is also so wide, it's strongly recommended, and most like controllers do not have too many actions to do when the gateway class changes. So keeping that in mind, is it possible that we can actually like have these observed generation bump checks on like gateways and routes rather than on a gateway class, right? Like for example, in like Azure's implementation, we pre-create those gateway classes for them, and we actually tell users, you don't need to touch that because our controller creates that one for you, and thereafter all you need to do is handle your gateways and routes and not your gateway classes, like once you've determined which is the one you're using. So another approach is, would it make sense to move this kind of test into the gateways and the routes?
Yeah, I think we already, that's a good question. I think we already have observed generation checks everywhere, almost everywhere in conformance tests as kind of like one of our baseline checks. So that's definitely something that we've done. And I think the idea is we have felt strongly enough about this to say it applies to every resource. So we went out of our way to, like, this is basically the only conformance test that exists for a gateway class that I'm really aware of, right? Everything else just gateway and below. It is definitely a pain, but I at this point I think it's worth the pain. Yeah, unfortunately.
I mean, as I said, as Rob said, because we don't check that it's accepted, it just that the status gets updated. This test is really just checking, are you watching gateway classes and ensuring that you've accepted some of them, like and that you're watching the other ones and saying, no, I don't accept these. Because it is if you don't, because the sort of the way that we defined it was the controller name. If we don't have that part of the thing, then we're kind of missing the bottom turtle. And so that's why, unfortunately, like I'd love to just be able to say, no, let's move this to extended, but I just think like we're running a bit of a risk here, and the fact that there is a reasonably straightforward workaround in that you can just make sure that you watch them and just update them to be false. And Mike raised in the chat that there's no good reason at the moment for when it is false. Yeah, I mean, I think that we could add a reason or two to make it clear here. But yeah, I think that to me it feels like yeah, there is a way to do this. I mean, we could maybe even record this in the implementers guide as well.
Yeah, I think in the worst case that it actually does help, to Costin's point, like reduce confusion for users. If a user, for whatever reason, creates a gateway class and they're wondering, hey, why does this not seem to be getting reconciled? Why is this not doing anything? At least having the explicit like status accepted false with a explicit reason of like gateway class is not supported by this controller implementation or something like that would be like very direct feedback for the user that would help.
Yeah, I think that's really what we're trying to get to is, hey, like this controller does exist. It just doesn't support what you're trying to do. That's the the nuance.
Costin's point is Costin's saying in the chat, like, maybe there's no controller, and that's actually one of the things that we are checking here. Like, the reason this conformance test exists in his core is that for the gateway profile, we expect that you will watch and update the status of gateway classes. And that's what this test checks, is that you're watching all gateway classes, not just one specific named one, and that you will do something about them. You don't have to support them, but you need to tell people if more than one gateway class is using a controller name, you need to be updating the status of all of them, including the ones that are accepted and the ones that are not accepted. And that's what this test tests. Again, maybe that could be clearer in the documentation.
Yeah, that's one thing, especially in this case in particular. Like, sometimes the rationale for a test is very clear, like we're testing a request header modifier or whatever, but it's not obvious. And so some comment, documentation, whatever, explaining why we're testing it, I think would be helpful. And also what Mike is saying of some kind of recommended condition, I think would also be useful. Yeah,
I can PR a new
Okay.
recommended condition. I'll handle that part.
sweet. Thanks. Then there's one other part of this discussion that I want to get to as well, because I think that may have actually been the easier part of the discussion, maybe. The more difficult one, in my opinion, is, I think you covered it further down in a comment somewhere, but you require that gateways have these annotations. Is that correct? Maybe someone can provide a bit more context.
Yeah, correct. So,
Okay.
I think the other requirement of the PR was to give steps on how to reproduce the generation of the gate conformance report. And unfortunately, there's no straight way for that, because, so again, an implementation detail of ours for like all gateway objects, we require our customers to put in an annotation. So essentially, like, we as a cloud provider have our control plane that is outside of the cluster and away from like where the controller is running. And so, one controller can essentially connect to one or many of our control planes. And the way to link that is using these annotations. Again, we were able to like get the conformance to run on our repo, because so essentially the conformance has a kube client, which was an interface. So we modified that to make sure like the gateway objects are injected with these annotations that our test needs. And hence we were able to run the conformance tests. But our repository in our code is all private, and we'll have to do extra work if we want to like be able to give you a way to reproduce, like we'll have to do a CLI tool or something like that to give you a way to like actually run conformance on our controller. So yeah, I think that's the big limitation, because we need these annotations added in. And
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thank you for the context. Is there a way, so you already have something that can inject a gateway with these annotations, and when that happens, conformance works. It's just you need these annotations present somehow. Is it
Correct.
possible to just expose that like injection tool? Like, what if your reproduction steps were run this injector tool and then run conformance tests and check mark, or I don't know. I don't exactly know what it would look like, but is that
yeah, I mean,
possible?
like maybe not like the injector, because like, so essentially what we have done is like, so that's why I said, right, the conformance, like if you look at the suite that the conformance test sets up, it has the client for Kubernetes that can be provided, like when you set up a new suite. So we've essentially like modified that client to make sure we can inject this, and we run it for that test. So I don't know if we're able to just expose that like injector. I don't know how like flexible because they still have to have the gateway API report checked out, and they'll have to. So maybe we can give a CLI tool that says, okay, application gateway for containers run conformance, and essentially with all the other parameters that a conformance test needs, and it can run it for you. But it would probably like take us some time to do this and figure out what the best way would be. And my request would be that, is it okay for us not to be blocked on getting this conformance in there? Because just, like, because we don't have a good way to reproduce it right now because of our implementation limitations.
No, that's a good question. I don't know. I need to think about this more. I am very interested in what the rest of the community thinks we should do here. I will say, let me link out to. We're gonna have some interesting things when we submit anything for GK, because we have a custom round tripper. I don't know if anyone supported or if anyone has submitted anything with a custom round tripper yet, but that will be our fun thing to get to when we do that. And that's because we have internal load balancers that we're trying to support. The other thing that I just wanted to mention real quickly is this idea that I think is close to what you're requesting, is get the report in so that it's visible before you're able to fully achieve the conformance requirements. Is that basically the request for the short term?
Yeah, I think that would be fair. Like we can have like a status saying like, this is what is done, and like some way to track, like, we can take ownership of what is pending on our end to track and make sure we ultimately get there. But, at least like then, like when people are weighing out and want to know, okay, what, like when they come to Gateway API, I know what the implementers are, and they know, okay, fine, if I need to go with this particular implementation, this is their pros and this is their cons, because they have this much implemented, or like this is like their limitations. So it would be nice, I think, like if you can have a partial and then like some way of tracking or like giving ownership of like, okay, we're eventually going to get that state. Because I get it when, if you allow this and then like, we don't come back and like do what we committed to, there's no good way of tracking, right? So yeah, I think like if we can come to a middle ground there, wherein like, yes, this is done, but they still have these action items. So
Yeah, no, I think that is the most reasonable thing for me here. There's a longer term path for some kind of approach to inject or do something with these annotations, and then we find some kind of way to indicate that this is the current state. It comes with these caveats, and kind of I think what you may have been suggesting, but there's some kind of fixed timeline. You can't stay in this kind of partial state for a long period of time. And this needs to be some kind of temporary exception that goes away. And the default action is to pull this out, not have it exist forever. But Nick, maybe you've got some thoughts.
Yeah, I think it seems it feels like this is not going to be the the last time that something like this happens. It's likely that we'll miss something else, or there'll be some behavior in the conformance test that mean that although because if in this case, if the implementation did support the observed generation bump, then the conformance test would pass, right? Because as run by your CI, but we don't have a way to sort of say, hey, there's something about this reproduction that not everyone can do, and we'd like this to be reproducible anywhere without needing access to the CI. So that we need like an override to say, override the state to like partial conformance, and here's the issue that tracks like what the the efforts to do that, and here's the time by which something needs to be done. So it feels like we could add some fields into the some optional fields into the conformance report that we could sort of basically we'd need to add something into the conformance suite, something into the and some stuff into the conformance report that sort of lets us put some stuff in the YAML, in the outputted YAML, that then for Christine's PR to actually display this, we can do something with the, mark something at the top to say conformance is partial for because it's not reproducible, or if that's what we decide to do. But that just lets us have an out here for if there's something else that's not covered by a specific conformance test, but we all agree, including the implementation, that that we want to get the conformance report in so that implementations have something to work towards. Then we have like a way to track that in the YAML, and that way whatever tooling we use has that information available. I'll put a comment on that issue, Rob, but I just wanted to put that in now as my thoughts here.
Yep. Cool. Okay, that all sounds good. I think we have a path forward for this. So if I'm remembering correctly, there are basically two outstanding issues on this. One is solvable in relative short term, which is the observed generation bump. Once that's solved, I think we're in a pretty good state here. And then the longer term one is what we really need to talk about, that like partial acceptance thing, and figure this out. So given those two things, is it okay if we hold off on merging this until you found a way forward for this workaround? Is that a reasonable delay, or is that too far out for you, do you think?
So to be honest, we're just about to do a new release in the next few days, which probably will not have this. I can go back and see how reasonable it is for us, and like probably given a timeline. I mean, what I can guarantee is like when we move towards Gateway API version v 1.1, we'll definitely have this in there, because like we want to make sure that we're compliant with that as well, and we want to report for that, so we can do that in. But with regard to whether, I mean, yes, I know the change is a very small change, but like we also have our own release cadence that run inside, and if I'm doing one like in the coming week, I don't, we're already in the RC phases, right? So I'm not sure I can cherry pick something like that. But I mean, again, like it's something I can do, and like probably maybe like we would not have a report for like a few weeks. So I'm okay either ways. Like if I get it, if everyone feels here that that's a small one and that should be addressed, but like the time it comes in then has to match with the timelines of our release. That's the only part.
I feel like at the moment, it actually had not putting the observed generation bump kind of is a little bit of a win here, because it means that we don't have to solve the requires annotations problem. To when you do solve the observed generation bump problem, then your core result, the result for core will move from partial to full to pass to conformance. And so, but that's kind of not really correct, because we want the thing. So it's actually fine. I think it's actually better to merge this as it is with it as partial, because that way for Candace was just asking in the chat about the matrix that Christina's been working on. And I think that Christine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that only shows things that pass conformance. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's actually like, again, I'm sorry about this now, but like the point of this thing is to be like, this matrix thing is intended to be a little bit of a reward for getting your conformance sorted. And sort of appearing on here is like the reward for passing your conformance. And so that is sort of then the carrot for everybody to get your conformance house in order and make sure that everything is good. So I think that we should actually look at merging this sooner rather than later, with the understanding that that we need to solve the annotation problem before we bump this one again. Candace?
Just a quick comment that I saw this table as a partial implementation table. I mean, if we have a list of features across the top that are core features, and checks or X's.
The problem is the difference between a feature and a test, and that those are not one-to-one.
Yes.
That's the same problem that Easter got into, for example. We skipped a test and the test was not correlated with any feature at all. And so there was no way for us to say, we implement everything except this one thing, because I guess you're not allowed to skip any tests or fail any tests, right? I think it's the same thing here. There's no feature for bumping observed generation, right? It's just a test that's kind of decoupled.
So I think the end state of this is, at least for me, I'm hoping to see, this end up as, core conformance checked, and then the other check marks are for extended conformance. This is a first cut of this. Is not a final implementation, but I think that I would like to see, or maybe that this thing ends. I think we've got a couple of things to do. Firstly, we need to make sure that we need to be a lot more clear about feature names meaning the feature, and that the tests sort of are tightly correlated with feature names, and we start talking about the tests in terms of the feature that they test. We haven't always been good at this in the past. It's work we've got to do with the conformance suite. But yeah, I think, and we need to be clear about on this page to say you don't show up on this page unless you pass core conformance, whatever is considered core. And the intent here is that these check marks and X's are for extended features only, or something like that. Just to be clear about the contract here, so that so that we're very clear. I think this is one of those times where, like, it's actually I really appreciate the Azure folks for sort of effectively finding a bug in our conformance process here. So we got to figure out the right ways around this. But to me, that's the end goal of this implementation style thing, is that we have we have a very clear contract that if you're on this page, you pass core conformance for that profile and for that record and that profile, and that the features that are here correspond to extended features, and that we've got some way for you to look up what this name means if it's not clear. Those are all to-dos though. The intent here was just to get something working. Maybe we need a call out here that this is still a work in progress, and that these results are not final or something. I don't know, Rob.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. This has been a good reminder that this is unfortunately still a work in progress for us. The entire conformance reporting system. What I would say, I mean, this, to be clear, this is an awesome set of improvements, but we still have a long ways to go. And one of the things that John called out specifically was the disconnect between a test and a feature. What I would say, which we have not made sufficiently clear, is if something doesn't have a feature name associated with it, which was the case with the test Istio ran into and the test Azure ran into as well, that means that we're basically saying that's a core feature, right? Like that there's no, if it has something like other than support HTTP route, like if it just has support HTTP route, that just means that's required to support HTTP route. If you can't support that, then you don't support the broader thing. So that's been confusing. We need to clean that up in terms of documentation. And in the Istio case, that resulted in splitting it out to an extended feature. I don't know that the same applies here as for the gateway class one specifically. But this has been a really good test of our system, as Nick said, and hopefully this inspires some good improvements to both documentation and reporting, so it's more clear. Because one of the things this whole conversation just made me think of is, like, maybe we need to make it very clear in this thing that any implementation in this test, by very definition, supports all the core features of HTTP route, for example, right? Because, and this is just the extended feature list, because that's something that we, kind of think, like, when you're really deep into the project, oh yeah, that's of course what it means, but obviously that's not as clear as we were intending. So really good feedback. We'll work on improving how features and everything else are reported and documented. Yeah, any other open questions, topics on this area?
I will take an action to put a update on Christine's PR with sort of some of the things that I think we should put on that page just to sort of make the contract clear.
Awesome.
And
Thanks.
I'll follow up on the Azure side. I am interested in us having a reproducible way for end users to run the conformance tests. I don't think that like pushing out a internal tool just for that purpose makes a whole lot of sense. I know that we've had other implementations that have like tweaked the conformance test framework to allow things like specifying timeout links or other tweaks that we've needed. Injecting an annotation doesn't seem like the worst thing to potentially allow. But I am like cognizant of this is something which at this point is apparently only needed by us and not by other implementations. So I'd definitely be curious to hear if this is a thing that other implementations have a use case for, or otherwise just yeah, looking to figure out what path we may have internally for finding a way to like reproduce this in a way that end users can run.
Yeah, and I should say the bar for reproducibility does not require like a polished external tool or whatever. Like I think, yeah, and I'm relying a lot on upstream Kubernetes conformance reports here that all require reproduction steps for any conformance report submitted. But I think, and I'll have to look back through there, I think some of them are pretty rough around the edges in terms of how they actually get to the point. Like maybe as an example, a gist of run this, even if there's some code bits in there, is maybe okay. I don't know, but we'll have to take a look at what's already been allowed in upstream Kubernetes as kind of a reference point. That's specifically for the reproduction steps. That's what we're being inspired by. So if we can find some examples there of less than ideal but workable solutions, maybe that could help us out. Not
Yep.
sure.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. And I know there's some extensibility parts of the conformance framework. Like, yeah, if you set up an operator that just like tags out anything that gets deployed with the gateway class types, and like maybe that's a path forward. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd like to figure out some way that we can do this.
Yeah, agreed. Cool. Well, this is really, I mean, I should make it very clear from if I haven't already, it is really exciting to get more implementations on board that are either conformant or very close to it. And so congrats, and looking forward to seeing even more show up in the weeks ahead. Yeah, with that, let's move on to the last little bits here. One, I just someone on my team, you had suggested that maybe our status doesn't need to be quite as verbose as our conformance currently requires it to be. This is entirely out of scope for 1.1, to be clear. This is, not something that we're suggesting change anytime soon. But right now, for anyone who's worked on conformance, is likely very familiar with the idea that every single listener needs to set resolved refs accepted and programmed on every listener on every gateway, which is probably okay. But if you get to the max length of listeners, and if we, for example, ever expand the length of listeners, which some have argued for, gets incredibly verbose. And that has me thinking, like, maybe we should only require have a top level requirement that these are all set on the gateway, and then we only require negative polarity on listener and assume positive polarity, or the invert. I'm not entirely sure what we do here. This is a can of worms. This is a can of worms that's not relevant until 1.2, but I just wanted to get some people thinking about this, some opinions. I specifically mentioned Nick because he has spent far too much time on status and probably hates me for bringing this up as even a possibility of changing this. But yeah, That's all. Just start of a conversation. And
Well, I'll have a think about it and have a look.
Yeah.
I worry about it. So let me
Yeah.
have a think about it.
Fair. Cool. Awesome. And then let me run through a few bits of triage, and I think that's everything. Oh, this has been a fun conversation, and it's just been me reviewing it, and I don't want to unilaterally make a bad decision here. But this person has added dark mode to Gateway API website, which is awesome, I think. But the problem is that, I guess somewhat expectedly, it does not do well with our current, if, so it defaults to your system defaults, which is fine, I guess. But a lot of our diagrams do not play nicely with that. So if you open this up, oh, I'm actually not in dark mode, but okay. So let's say we open this up. We're in dark mode for a change. Then, our logo is a little off, and this is a variety of things are just not great throughout the thing. And I've said that we probably shouldn't accept dark mode unless it can be off by default, or which unfortunately the current implementation cannot, or we can update all our diagrams to work acceptably well in dark mode. And both of those are pretty big asks. So this is a conversation for the broader community. Does anybody want to merge before we get to that point? Because we've basically reached a point where we can't make this off by default. So your only option is to have it match your system preferences, or we should wait until all the diagrams can be updated for dark mode. Does anybody have a strong opinion on this one?
I think. No, sorry. Someone else go.
Oh, that was me. Sorry. Wait is my strong opinion.
I was about to say I don't have a strong opinion. It seems fine to, like, it's not ideal, but to me, I'm like, it's probably fine. It actually, when pulling up the page from Windows, it actually does default to light mode, and I have to click to change to dark mode, even though I have my OS set to dark mode.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, for me, it always follows system default on Mac and a couple different browsers, but
I think Mac has the best OS support for dark mode, and so it's probably the one that's the most likely to be a problem.
Yeah. So 1 vote for wait until we can fix diagrams, 1 vote for don't care, and any other votes? Okay, well, for now, I think that's the wait votes are gonna have it, but if you feel differently, don't hesitate to chime in on this one. This is a new contributor, so I hate to leave them hanging, but it is, unfortunately not great in its current state in dark mode, in my opinion. So I don't know. All right. Next one is just added a couple of Garav's PRs. Garav has been doing amazing work on Gateway Cuddle, and this could potentially be useful for any controllers that are looking into reading from, well, I think Garav, you already mentioned this in maybe a previous meeting, but basically you're using Discovery to find the preferred version of an API in a cluster, and then you're using that throughout for everything else in Gateway Cuddle, which I think is really clever and potentially useful beyond just Gateway 1.1, as we start to do more and more graduation to, like what we're doing with gRPC route. This kind of code I think will be really helpful. Yeah, So I think this is really great, and I'd encourage more people to take a look and review this code as well, just so Gaurav can get some more feedback from people that aren't
Yep,
me.
yep.
That's yeah.
And any kind of feedback over here is helpful. If you do have the time or the cycles, please drop in some comments, or otherwise, yeah, anything is helpful over here. Thank you.
Cool. And then one last gateway cuddle one.
Sorry, Rob. I just wanted to mention that Gaurav, I'm sorry, I haven't been looking at the gateway kettle gateway kettle PRs that much because y'all have been doing such a great job, and I have just put it in my Gaurav's got this covered bucket. So if you ever do want me to have a look at something, then feel free to ping me on it. But yeah, basically every time I'm like, this is a gateway kettle PR, and I've just been sorry, I don't have the bandwidth, but
Yeah,
I'll have a look at that if you like.
Thanks a lot, Nick. No, I think that's totally fine. I think for the reviews which I am responsible for myself, I think that that is something that I can get done. But if I'm sending out a PR, yes, that is something which I do need to get someone to help out with. So yeah, if whenever someone finds the time, I'd appreciate some feedback.
Cool.
Thank you.
And one last thing, also, Gateway Cuddle is it will be reference grant aware with this PR. So we're fine. These are like huge changes that I'm really excited to see come in, and I'm hoping we can get these out merged before RC2, because again, we're trying to not make any changes between RC2 and the final release. And Gateway Cuddle is, of course, versioned with Gateway API. So it would be great just to get these two reviewed and if we're saying RC2 is on Thursday tentatively, then yeah, a review in the next couple of days would be very, very helpful. Yeah. And then the very last one is I just wanted to bring back Christine's PR. She's been doing awesome work here. I think we're in the final stretch. At least that's my personal take on it. I added like a little bit more review just this afternoon. But Christine, I don't know if you have any additional updates. I think this is very close to good, in my opinion, at least for a starting point.
Yeah, I think besides the little blurb at the top, I think everything is good for like round one, and then we'll probably iterate over it in the future.
Cool. Awesome. Well, this is really exciting. Encourage anyone who's, especially if your implementation is represented in this set of implementations that have submitted conformance reports, encourage you to double check, make sure everything looks correct. But yeah, I'm really excited to get this one in soon, and it'll be a huge help for anyone trying to choose their next implementation of Gateway API. So thanks. And with that, we've made it to the end of the agenda. Yeah, any last things, or we can get a few minutes back? All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, all.